Participation in purity, the Scriptures tell us, is demanded by God. For a verse, turn back to 2 Corinthians with me, chapter 7. Remember those rascals in Corinth, those saints that didn't act like it? Remember the people getting drunk at communion services, the people that were committing immorality and were fighting and divorcing and suing each other and saying terrible things they shouldn't say and abusing the gifts and just puffed up with pride. Do you remember those people? Those people that Paul spent 18 months with. Look what he says in his second epistle, 2 Corinthians chapter 7. He says this, because Paul was the apostle of purity. In each city where Christ's church was birthed, Paul called the believers to live a life of integrity, to live out the high and holy calling of sanctified living. So in the carnality, all that carnality of Corinth, Paul begged the saints. Verse 1 of chapter 7 of 2 Corinthians. Since we have these promises, dear friends. Now, you pick up the dear friends part. Remember I told you at the beginning of this little section we've been doing on younger men that the attitude that Paul said to Titus that he was supposed to approach this realm of the requirements of God was to be an exhorting and encouraging, almost a pleading and begging, not a heavy-handed banging, but a gentle imploring. Notice the same thing. As obedient children, he's telling these Corinthians, they're dear friends. Since we have these promises, dear friends, though you've struggled, and he's got chapters of all the admonitions and rebukes, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. Do you see the gentleness that he said that? Let us. He didn't say, you scoundrels, clean up your act. Let us. He says, I struggle too. He says, we all are painfully aware of our sin and of our struggle. Paul said, I identify with you. I am agonizing through life. Sun agonizomai, he called it. He said, life is an agonizing struggle against our flesh within, against sin seeping in from without, looking for any unprotected area to come through the cracks and to come in and to corrode and to corrupt and to mold and to make us defiled. He said, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit. He said there's a lot more sins than just those body sins. He says there's a lot of attitude sins. He says there's a lot of mental things that in our spirit we can contaminate and look so good. That's why externalism is so vain and so empty. So many people think that if they just look right, if they have just the right clothes, and if their hair is either long enough or short enough, depending on whether they're a man or a woman, that they can just really cut it and they're just pleasing to God. And God says, it's not just your body, I'm concerned about your spirit. And I want you to look at this. Perfect holiness out of reverence for God. Purify yourself from everything that contaminates. You notice there's a response needed. Demanded by God, but begged for by Paul. Well, Peter was the same. Turn back to 1 Peter with me. Keep going to the right. 1 Peter chapter 1. Because similarly, as Peter ministered to the cosmopolitan greatest cities of the Roman Empire in Asia Minor, and as he ministered the word to them in 1 Peter 1 and verse 14, he also pleads with believers to live the life that matches their calling and their doctrine and their beliefs. Live a life that's consistent, that has integrity. 1 Peter 1:14. And he has that same gentleness. Paul said, as dear friends. Peter says, as obedient children, as dear, precious, beloved children. Do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. He said, don't live like you used to live. Don't go back. Don't revert to your flesh settings. Allow the sanctifying work to go on in your life. Verse 15. Just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. Make choices for holiness, as it is written, verse 16. Be holy because I'm holy. Peter has the same call and echoes what Paul said. He says, maintain the integrity of purity. You have a pure God. You have a pure message. You have a high and pure calling, imputed righteousness. Now you have to make a choice. You have to live it out. All that because practical purity is a choice. God has done his part, but we must also do ours. And the whole judgment seat of Christ, the whole fire that is going to test our works, is all going to be about the choices that we made in our lives